Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Forever Interview series, where today I have Dr. Kalish all the way from Northern California in my hot seat today, and I have a little bit to share about him. He has developed his own model of functional medicine founded on 20 years of successful clinical results while working with over 8,000 patients in his own private practice. He has certified over 700 practitioners worldwide in the Kalish method, which involves patient challenges through a proven lab-based mentorship program addressing the three key areas of hormones, GI, and detoxification. He has trained practitioners from Dr. Mercola's medical staff to Mayo Clinic physicians in the Kalish method functional medicine protocols. So welcome to my hot seat today, Dr. Kalish. How are you?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, in Vegas, it's probably the same weather that you're having, kind of cloudy and overcast, so I'm right there with you. It's probably the same. But thank you for joining us today. I know you're a busy man. And I want you to start off, if you could share with our audience today, what led you to this path of natural health and medicine? And he's also a chiropractor guy. So what helps you go, or what kind of guided you to this industry?
Yeah, when I was in my early 20s, my father died, and I was very close with him, and it kind of put me into like a personal emotional crisis. So I ended up getting rid of all my stuff, gave everything away, and I went to a monastery in southern Thailand, and I lived there for a couple of years, living with monks and just kind of doing a lot of meditation and studying Buddhism under one of these enlightened Buddhist masters. And when I came back from Thailand, after a couple of years in the monastery, I decided to devote myself to some kind of service-oriented thing. And the natural health world just sort of made sense as the next step. So it was how I started to fix my own health problems, and I decided that that was kind of going to become a career based on my personal experience. Because when I was in Thailand, I picked up a really nasty parasitic infection, and none of the Western conventional doctors back here in the U.S. could figure out what was going on. And it was solved by a naturopath. And so I realized, wow, this could be a sign. Maybe I should go into doing this work as well.
I have been in this industry for 10 years, and I used to work with a naturopath doctor side by side in Michigan when I lived there. So I completely understand. So that's a big, starting with your dad dying such a young age of your life, but you obviously have been on the other end. So now you know what you can provide for your patients is that help to actually be cured and not just treated.
Yeah, and in fact, in my training program, we have a form that the doctors fill out when they're submitting a lab for us to analyze. And one of the questions it asks is, what was going on in the patient's life around the time when their health problems started? And probably 60–80% of the time, the problems that they are facing originally started during a period of grief, emotional stress from death or loss, or emotional stress from a divorce. 70–80% of the time, that's when people's health problems started. So it's pretty significant. It was my personal experience, but we see it with people across the board.
Mm-hmm. Well, emotions, people don't quite realize just how big that is a play in your body's stress naturally. So good for you to point that out. I do. I remember losing a friend to cancer right after a nasty divorce that he went through. So there's definitely a tie there for sure. You are very gifted in female hormones and weight gain, and I had my own share of experience. I didn't think I could get pregnant. I have endometriosis, and I was suggested to take a natural progesterone cream. Lo and behold, I got pregnant, which was a challenge for 8 years of my marriage, not getting pregnant. Well, I lost the baby after 6 weeks, and then I thought, well, I'll just jump back on the train. At least I know this works. And lo and behold, of course, 10 years ago, I had my daughter. So there's definitely a link there, and I want to talk about that. And you kind of mentioned, this series was kind of to go backwards in aging. We want to age backwards a little bit, and I'm turning 40 this month, so I selfishly want to know too how to age backwards, but I know my audience is just as curious. So help us understand how important it is to regulate your hormones and how much it changes in your aging. So give us some background on that.
Yeah, and how the hormones naturally change as you age. So,
yes.
I mean, there's good news and bad news. It's mostly bad news. So, once you're over the age of 30, it's normal and inevitable that, the hormone levels start to decline, progesterone and estrogen. By the time you hit, somewhere between age 45 and 55, they drop so low that your menstrual cycle stops. And so what we find is the biggest problem is that female hormone levels, I mean, there's no way to stop the natural decline, and you might not even want to stop the natural decline. But where we see there's actually a big problem is when people are in adrenal burnout, when a woman is overly stressed from emotional or dietary or some kind of inflammatory stress, and that drives her cortisol up, and that prematurely lowers her progesterone and prematurely lowers her estrogen, leading to things like infertility, like you were experiencing, or PMS, or depression, or food cravings, or whatever the symptoms of the low progesterone might be. And that's what we see in almost all the patients that we test, is low progesterone and low estrogen levels that were triggered by the emotional or dietary or inflammatory stress that pushed the adrenal hormones too far. So it's like this cascade of problems. Adrenal hormone levels shoot up, female hormone levels drop in response to different kinds of stressors.
Well,
that's avoidable, and that's avoidable and fixable. That's the whole point.
Okay, well, that's the good news.
Yeah.
Well, it seems so more common these days for women in their 20s and 30s to need help getting pregnant, which just seems odd. So what do you think is the main factor for that besides stress?
Yeah, and we see this on the labs too, because I've been tracking these labs for 22 years now. So we routinely see in the training program doctors submitting labs for women in their 20s and 30s that have a total progesterone for the whole month of around an 800. And that would be identical to the total progesterone for the month of a woman who's, let's say, 75 years old. So we, on a weekly basis, see labs of women in their 20s who look like women in their 70s. So stress is definitely a factor. And the other big factor, because I think stress has always been there, right? I mean, there's always been a fair amount of emotional stress for human beings in general, is environmental toxicity and endocrine disruptors, what they call endocrine disruptors. So these are environmental toxins that change the way that hormones are produced, and in bad ways, right? They're chemicals that get into the body, and they're similar enough in their molecular structure to mimic a hormone and to disrupt the normal production of hormones. And this is a pretty big problem worldwide, and not just with our species, but with frogs and fish and birds and all kinds of wildlife that are also experiencing these endocrine disruption type problems, to the extent that some species, are becoming extinct because their reproductive capacity is so limited.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
It is. It's like we're dying out. It just seems, I have a close friend that had to, in her 20s, did in vitro. So I just thought that was odd at such a young age to have to do that. So that's the bad news.
Yeah. And there's a solution for that too, obviously, is you try to avoid environmental toxins as much as possible and make sure that you support your liver and you do detox protocols to clean out any of the chemicals and heavy metals that are in your body so you don't get continual exposure, right? So there's ways to try to resolve that. Some of it's inevitable. Some of it you can't control because it's just in the air and in the water, and there's nothing you can do about it. But there's things you can do to try to reduce your toxicity exposure.
I don't think we realize just how much we're exposed to every day. I think we would stay in our houses if we knew exactly what we do. And even our house might be our own problem, with the toxins around us. So our environment's killing off our chances of reproducing is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. You think global warming is a problem? We won't be around to enjoy the warmer new planet.
Oh man. Well, we don't have really a shortage on the planet of people. That's the good news.
That's true.
We're doing fine. We're not scarce yet. So toxins, what would be the best remedy for detoxifying? What do you do with your patients? Just to give our audience some hope of where to start.
Well, I do something complicated. I do these lab tests where we actually measure the detox pathways, and then I design supplement programs based on the labs. So that's kind of expensive and complicated. But the simple version of it is, number one, is you stop putting new toxins in. So that means you check your lipstick. Does it have lead in it? If it does, you throw it away or give it to someone next door that you don't like, that you want to give lead poisoning to, and buy a lipstick that's lead-free. Same with perfumes, beauty care products, cleaning products. Just start to get your own exposure down. That's the most obvious thing, right? And then secondly, you want to try to flush out the toxins that you have. And there's two old-fashioned ways to do that, which are cheap or free and time-tested. One is sweating. Saunas, hot baths. Saunas are better. to sweat the toxins out. And then the other, obviously, that goes along with that is hydration. You know, making sure that you're drinking half your body weight in ounces of water per day. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you should be drinking 50 ounces of water a day to flush out toxins. You don't always have to drink that much water all the time, but that's enough to start to get toxins mobilized and flushed out. And obviously, you don't want to drink water that's toxic, so you don't want to have water that's got fluoride in it or chlorine in it. So filtered water that's clean.
Right.
About half your body weight in ounces per day. That's pretty. Oh, and then the last thing, if you're really into it, is you can start to eat vegetables, because vegetables obviously have the nutrients that you need to detox. And there's two kinds that are important. One are cruciferous vegetables. That would be, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, that kind of stuff. And if you ever cook broccoli and then you leave it in the fridge, the next day it has this weird smell to it. That's the sulfur-containing compounds that are in cruciferous vegetables. And those sulfur compounds run the major detox pathways we call phase 2 liver detox pathways. So those are really important. And then the second general type that are important are green leafy vegetables that are full of minerals and whatnot. So, you can detox just with vegetables and with water. I mean, it's pretty much... vegetable juice is even better. If you can drink vegetable juice, that's an even better way to do it.
Yeah, I know. I love to blend up green smoothies.
Yeah,
so
you can do that every day, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good practice to get into anyway. So we can eat green veggies, especially broccoli, drink lots of water. I had a patient of mine the other day not a patient, but a client who couldn't figure out why she wasn't feeling well, and she was eating everything right, but she wasn't drinking any water at all. So it's like, hello, my method is, if you can't flush a toilet without water, so same kind of method to your body, you got to flush it out.
That's a good point, yeah.
You need water, guys. It's simple and easy for them to remember. Very good, very good. So food, and I like that you talk about the chemicals, because I want to make people aware, and I always use a lot of natural beauty secrets, because as females are horrible. Our bathroom alone is just covered in toxic stuff, beauty products, from hairspray to the wrong shampoos to how you clean the bathroom sink alone. I mean, they're just everywhere. So I like that you touched point on that. And the good news is there's a lot of great products out there that are not harmful to you or the planet. So thanks for pointing that out. Huge for us females. We're a big contributor, I'm sure, to the chemicals floating around. So tell me a little bit, what does the brain have to do with the female hormones?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I don't know how complicated to get, but there's if you have listeners that are real kind of technical, science oriented, they can Google DARP32, DARRP-32, and this they gave out the Nobel Prize a bunch of years back for the doctors that discovered this. But basically, the short version of it is, there's chemicals in the brain, the most important one is dopamine, that are regulating pretty much all the hormone output in the rest of the body. And DARP32 kind of laid this out in a very technical, kind of scientific way. But we know this, and probably every woman kind of intuitively knows that how she's feeling and what she's thinking is directly related to where she's at in her cycle and what's happening with her hormones, right? And that to have perfectly great brain function, where your memory's great, your energy is great, your focus and concentration are great, that all is pretty heavily dependent on the female hormones being balanced. So there's an interaction back and forth. For example, when estrogen levels decline, the brain chemical serotonin declines with it as well. So if estrogen levels drop, women can get a little depressed. As estrogen levels go up, serotonin levels go up. Which, when does estrogen go up in your cycle, right? As you're ovulating, right? So as estrogen's coming up and you're the most fertile for that time of the month, you're also the happiest, theoretically, for that time of the month, because your serotonin's coming up, right? So there's a pretty strong interaction between these two systems. And to a large extent, the brain is directing and controlling what the hormone system is doing. And so when we do these protocols, we're not just looking at the hormones and testing the hormones, but we're also taking into account the regulatory and control systems that the brain is running to dictate how the hormones are produced. And that's all part of the lab work. And that's why when we do the female hormone testing, we do a month-long panel that measures progesterone and estrogen levels throughout the whole cycle, so that you can see how the brain is controlling the hormones throughout the month, not just a single sample of a hormone level to just take a peek at what's happening, but a more comprehensive view of the whole cycle.
Interesting. So we're happiest when we're ovulating. So when your estrogen dips, what would you suggest would be the best to do? Stay far, far away from everyone?
Yeah.
Give us
I
hope.
think chocolate and maybe a People magazine is the best solution, and a hot bath.
That's
No,
right.
yeah, I mean, when your estrogen dips, I mean, that's what we do the labs for. I mean, it's pretty hard for a woman to self-regulate her estrogen back up. I mean, there's a lot of self-help stuff you can do, but that one's probably
Yeah.
not going to happen. I mean, you could, if you don't want to deal with the whole doctor route, try some kind of herbal protocol like chasteberry or peony, or some kind of herbal tincture type product to help stabilize your hormones throughout the month. But if you actually want to fix the whole system, then these month-long tests that measure everything out, then we do very specific protocols based on the labs. And I think, it's reasonable is for women to give, any kind of hormone problem, maybe 3 or 4 months of home treatment and just trying on their own to fix things. And then if you're, 3, 4 months into it and it's not really helping, then try to get some professional help.
Yeah. I never quite understood why some people have such strong challenges around that time. I have a 24-hour window that I know it's me, not anybody else. It's just me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just take my ball and go home and don't play with anybody for those 24 hours.
Yeah.
But not everyone's as attuned to their body as that, and they just have challenges throughout that time and cause a lot of drama in their life, unfortunately. But so it's a great test and measure. 3 months, just kind of play around with it. And for my own understanding, we have 3 hormones. We have testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, correct? Is that what we have in our bodies, or is there more that I don't know about?
No, there's a lot. There's dozens of hormones, but those are the ones that people care about. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually 3 types of estrogen. It's a little complicated, but
Really?
yeah.
I love hearing about this stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So there's E1, E2, and E3.
Okay.
There is no actual hormone called estrogen. Estrogen is the name of a class of hormones. So estrone, O-N-E, estrone is E1. Estradiol, di means 2, right? Estradiol is E2. And estriol, T-R-I, like a tricycle, is E3. So when you say estrogen, what you really are referring to is E1, E2, and E3. And they all exist in both men and women, in different amounts. And estradiol is the main estrogen that most people usually focus on, but there's actually 3 of them. And then we have testosterone. Testosterone levels don't fluctuate so much throughout the month. They're pretty stable in women. But obviously estrogen levels fluctuate depending on the time of the month. And then progesterone, there's only one type of progesterone. Progesterone goes up and down throughout the month. And the progesterone is the one that's in the cream that you were referring to.
Mm-hmm.
They sell progesterone creams over the counter without a prescription right now in the U.S.
Yes, in fact, I think mine was made from Mexican yams or some kind of natural substance, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Which that's what started my whole process. Like, this is pretty neat. There's more out there. That's when I went back to school, obviously, and got into holistic nutrition. And of course, you're applying it on your skin. It's not something you have to take. Goes right into your bloodstream. What kind of remedies do you use? I mean, are you using bioidentical type of hormones? I mean, tell us, what do you give your patients?
Yeah, so when I was first in school, there was a medical doctor that trained me named Dr. John R. Lee, and he wrote a series of books. The first one was called What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Menopause, and then they created a whole series. And he was the first one that started to recommend the use of the creams. He started doing this like back in the 70s, and then I think that book came out in the early 90s, and I used the creams in my practice for at least 3 or 4 years. And then what I figured out once I started doing the lab testing is it's really hard to regulate the exact dosage with the creams. And that some women, not all, but some women will saturate, or the creams will build up to really high levels of progesterone that are too high. And so you have to, if you're going to use the creams, you need to be tested every 6 months to make sure your levels are okay. So it's a hassle. So usually I use liquids or drops of progesterone in my practice now. Each drop is a milligram, so it's easier to regulate the exact amount that a woman needs. And when you have the month-long test, you can see on each day of the month how many milligrams she needs, so you can be very specific with the protocols. And you don't have the build-up problem that you do with the creams, so you don't have to monitor people as carefully. But you get all the advantage of the creams, which is that it's delivered directly into the bloodstream without having to swallow a pill.
So you use drops, and we put those in liquid, obviously drink it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's what you use.
Just put them right. You can actually just put the drops underneath your tongue, right in your mouth.
If it tastes okay.
Yeah, it burns a little bit, but people get used to it.
Well, that sounds scary. It burns your tongue right off, but you're good.
Yeah,
Your hormones are good.
yeah, it's worth it.
Wow. No, I've done lots of herbal cleanses and things of that nature too, and the only downside to some of the herbal cleanses was it would stain my teeth, so I would drink it with juice or something.
Oh, right.
I love. I could talk for hours about just cleansing and that sort of thing, and because I would work with my naturopath doctor and get tested and do liver cleanses and things of that nature too. Love that stuff. Um, so, since a lot of women are going into menopause that could be listening to this call, what's the hope for them? Because their biggest challenge, of course, besides mood swings, is hot flashes and that uncomfortable feeling. I've yet to experience those. I'm not looking forward to that. But what's the hope of that? Is progesterone cream a good help? What other maybe natural remedies can they try before they go see someone like yourself?
Yeah, I can only really safely use the creams if you're seeing a doctor and getting tested every 6 months.
Right.
They can make you feel a lot better, but it's risky to take them without being monitored. So I don't think that's a good idea. But you can do any one of a variety of different herbal products that have black cohosh, chasteberry. There's all kinds of different, there's probably, the one that I think is probably the most helpful if you just want something off the shelf without a doctor is this stuff called Estrovera by Metagenics. You can probably buy it from Amazon. Metagenics is supposed to be one of these doctor-only companies, but they sell it on the internet everywhere. And it's pretty easy. It's just a single pill a day. It really helps with hot flashes and night sweats. And there's no actual hormones in it, so you don't need a bunch of lab testing. So something like Estrovera, or the other one that's classic that a lot of women use and it helps a lot is black cohosh, some derivative of that. That can make a huge difference. And it's worth, like I said earlier, trying the herbs for 3 or 4 months, see if you can get under control. And if not, then you can get professional help.
Absolutely.
Or Remifemin is another one. Remifemin is really popular. Okay. You can buy that one anywhere.
Very good. Well, that's just it. Is that I want to give hope to people that they don't have to be miserable. They can still enjoy life. They can get this under control. Is the message.
Yeah, you don't have to take prescription hormones. That's been proven to be extremely dangerous and not worthwhile.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. Obviously, you don't prescribe prescription hormones, and I don't want my audience, I would never encourage them to go and get that done. I would really suggest going your route. I can't stress that enough. So let's talk about lab-created, unnatural, prescribed hormones. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, in the 1960s, they came out with a drug called Premarin, which is named for where it's from, right? Pregnant mare's urine, Premarin. So they keep horses pregnant in a stall, I don't know, somewhere in bad neighborhood of some town. I don't know where it is. Right? It's an animal rights issue too, obviously, because keeping a horse pregnant and making them pee a lot, you collect their urine, you get the hormones out of there. And turns out they started using this stuff in the early 60s. By the early 70s, women were dying from all kinds of cancers that doctors had never seen before. And then they figured out, wow, maybe giving horse estrogen to human females is a little risky. So then in the mid-70s, they came up with the brainstorm of, we're just going to add in some synthetic progesterone to this horse estrogen to eliminate the risk of cancer. Because we know if women have progesterone and estrogen together, estrogen is a growth hormone, right? Estrogen causes things to grow. And if you get excess estrogen, then you're going to get excess cell growth, which is one thing that we call cancer. So they added in this other drug called Provera to the Premarin, and then they called that Prempro. And that was standard HRT from the mid-70s up until maybe 2002, somewhere around there, 2006, somewhere around there. And when they finally did a study, there was a congresswoman who was so fed up with this that she allocated federal funds to actually research something that had been going on for 40 years. And when they did the study, it was called the Nurses Study. I think it was 16,000 women they looked at. They had to stop the research study 5 years in because there's limits in the United States to how many people can die from a research study before you have to stop it. In other words, there's like human safety trials issues. They literally had to stop the study after 5 years because so many women were dying from taking Prempro. And what they discovered was that the risk of heart disease, breast cancer, uterine cancer, Alzheimer's disease, all these problems were escalating in the women that were taking Prempro. And these drugs were promoted from the 60s on as being cardioprotective, better for your bones, healthy, 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 healthy. So the news on this broke in the 2002, 2006 range, and it was so outrageous, the negative results of the study, that doctors in general became really skeptical about prescribing these hormones. Literally, I calculated it once. There were several million American women that died unnecessarily because of the 40-year use of those particular hormones. Now, they can't do research studies on these drugs because they're so dangerous they can't even do clinical trials, but they're still available and women still take them all the time. If you want to go that route and you, for some reason, want to take prescription hormones, you can buy or get bioidentical or natural hormones from a conventional medical doctor from a compounding pharmacy. That's totally doable and not that difficult to do these days. So you don't ever have to take Premarin or Provera, which have been proven to be so dangerous. If you really want to do prescription hormones for some reason, you can at least get the bioidentical hormones, which are considered to be a lot safer. Or you can drop it down a notch and not do any prescription hormones at all and try to solve it with the natural products, which are quite a bit weaker and less likely to cause side effects and a little harder to work with and take a little bit more time. But, safety above all else is the whole do no harm model, right?
Yeah, you're worth it to spend a little more time researching and testing. I mean, you only get one body, guys. Make it count.
Yeah, and you don't want to take large dosages of a synthetic growth hormone like Premarin. It's just not safe.
40 years it was on the market? I didn't know it was on the market that long.
Yeah, 1965, right around there, they started selling it.
Unbelievable.
Now, in fairness to the medical profession, they didn't know that it was cancer-causing until they'd been using it for probably 5-10 years. So they started in the mid-60s. By the mid-70s, everybody knew the science behind it was really negative. And it really wasn't until the big study came out in the early 2000s that it was, kind of common knowledge how dangerous it was. But my teacher, Dr. Lee, knew all the danger and risk factors of Premarin and Provera in 1975, 20 years before I even met him. And
they still were prescribing it, and it was still available.
Yeah, and it's, I love America, and I would never leave this country, well, that's not true. I might leave this country someday, but, it's basically just based on money. And, the company Wyeth that was selling Premarin was making several $1 billion a year, and they very carefully calculate the number of lawsuits that are going to happen once their, danger is discovered, and it was worth it. And in fact, by the time they had to start to face all the lawsuits, they had made so much money it didn't matter anymore economically. So
they countered in the factor of lawsuits, and they still came out ahead financially. So that's how they looked at it. Great, that's fabulous.
That happens over and over again with every drug that's being produced in this country.
Yes, that's what I want our audience to be aware of. It's just there's always a better route to go, and there's always a solution. There's a natural version. Of course, you still need to be very respectful of the natural version too, because again, too much of one thing can be harmful, even in a natural state too. So you got to be careful.
Yeah, like the creams. If you use too much of the creams for too long, you can actually raise your estrogen levels by using progesterone cream. Mm-hmm. I've seen that in the labs before.
Yeah. So be smart. Get somebody that knows more than you do, and work with that person.
Yeah, and if you're not working with a doctor, just do do harmless things that have been around for thousands of years.
Exactly.
Like black cohosh, remifemin, the Estrovera, all these products I was talking about. Those are safe. They're not going to hurt anybody.
Right. They don't have a list of side effects that's longer than my arm. Exactly. Well, let's talk about weight loss for a little bit and how hormones are related to that. So I've had many clients in the past think, Carrie, I can't lose weight. Is it my thyroid? What's going on? They always think it's something else outside of what they're doing that could be slowing down their weight loss. So give us some insight on that.
Yeah, so, there's many factors. Most people that are overweight are just eating too much food or eating the wrong food. But let's assume that you got your diet figured out perfectly, and you're not losing weight, and you're exercising the right amount. That's sort of the definition of a damaged metabolism, right? When the whole calories in, calories out equation is falling apart. So you're not eating that much food, you're exercising a lot, and yet your weight's not changing. Your metabolism is going to control the rate at which you burn body fat. And if your metabolism is damaged because hormones aren't working properly, then you're not going to be able to lose weight, even if you try to starve yourself. And even if you exercise a ton. Because the calorie restriction diets and the intense cardio exercise are going to act as an even bigger stressor and damage your metabolism even more. So, and this is the biggest problem with people who have gained and lost weight in the past. If you gained 20 pounds and then lost it, and gained 30 pounds and then lost it, the more times you went up and down like that, the more damage your metabolism would be at this point, present time. So that's something to consider too. So if someone's been on yo-yo diets for 15 or 20 years, it's pretty much guaranteed their metabolism is going to be quite damaged. So what we do is we test and correct the hormones. You've got thyroid hormones, female hormones, adrenal hormones. Get all those systems running properly so you can repair your metabolism and get your fat burning back to normal.
Very good. That's insight all by itself. Because not everyone sees, well, why do I need to get my hormones regulated? But we're very vain, us females especially. And if it means you can get your weight under control, it might be enough incentive for them to get that checked out.
And sex drive too. So weight loss, improved sex drive, which is the most common complaint in my patients, and more energy. More energy, better sex drive, and losing some weight. Those are the big three.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. All about the sex drive.
Yeah, and I'd say probably 90%, 95% of my female patients, if you ask them, they don't always write it down. If you ask them, they'll say their sex drive is really not very good, not what it should be. Right.
And if they're trying to have babies, they're going to have a problem.
Yeah, or even just have a relationship or get in a relationship because they just, fake it, or they usually don't let their partner know, oh, I never feel like having sex, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Right.
But, it's just men figure it out. Men are pretty dense, but not completely dense. Eventually they figure out, wow, this isn't really something that she enjoys anymore, and it's sort of a bummer for both of us. Because the man's pleasure is all predicated on how much pleasure the woman's having ultimately. So.
Very true. Women, get your hormones checked out.
Yeah. Or have your boyfriend or husband pay for it.
That's right. That's right. Make it a priority. Very cool. You have a little bit of a myth about premature ovarian failure that I want to talk about. Tell us about premature ovarian failure. And I think we might have covered a little bit of it before, with not being able to get pregnant probably in your 20s and so on. But go a little deeper with that, please.
Yeah, this is one of my pet peeves. So I often get women who are diagnosed by conventional doctors as having premature ovarian failure, which kind of means that you can't get pregnant because your ovaries have just given up. And in every case I've ever had, when we've done the proper test, which is the month-long test panel, what we see is, in fact, she is ovulating, but just not at the right time of the month. So if your regular doctor is testing you in the middle of the month, what if you ovulate on day 8 or day 5 or day 22? They're going to miss it, and it's going to look like you're not ovulating at all. In all these years of doing this testing, I've never seen a woman with premature ovarian failure who was actually having ovarian failure. They are always ovulating, but it's just at a different time of the month than expected. So when you do the month-long panels, you can see, oh, she's ovulating on day 8. Why don't we set up a program to move that ovulation to the middle of the month so she could potentially get pregnant? And so again, it's just one of these things, because I don't think it's like in medicine and in life we do this a lot. We just make up things based on what we see is around us. And I think the conventional doctors have made up this premature ovarian failure because they're not doing the month-long test. And what they see as the failure is the lack of ovulation in the middle of the cycle. But if you're being more thorough with the lab work, you'll see that that's really rarely, if ever, the case. It's just the woman's cycle's been thrown off, often by taking birth control in the past, sometimes just because of a lot of stress. And we just need to reset the natural cycle, get her to start to ovulate again at the right time of the month, and boom, the cycle's back. And so the other thing is, it's just sort of a devastating and nasty thing to tell a woman, you have premature ovarian failure. It's just like, I don't know, it's not really a put down, but it's kind of like you're never going to be a mom, and your ovaries are just like, you have like loser ovaries, like there's something wrong with them or something. And it's just a matter of doctors doing the wrong testing. It's kind of sad.
Well, yeah, it's a personal rejection kind of feeling, like you're just not good enough to be a mom. Your body parts are done.
Yeah.
So it could be just different times of the month that they're ovulating.
Almost always it's what it is.
Calculate when you're happiest, guys. We talked about this.
Yeah, exactly.
When are you happy? So do our hormones have anything to do with what makes us hungry and makes us overeat, and that whole excuse of chocolate during those times of the month?
I know. I remember when I was like in my 20s, I went to buy some chocolate for my girlfriend. I went into this chocolate shop, and the guy behind the counter was, "So what does your girlfriend want?" I was like, "How did you know?" He's like, "Well, 99% of our customers are women, and then 1% of guys that come in here are buying chocolate for their girlfriends." So there's clearly a hormonal component to chocolate, right, that any chocolate shop owner knows. And, some people think it's a magnesium in the chocolate, maybe it's a caffeine or some other component of the chocolate or the antioxidants. But at certain times of the month, when especially progesterone levels are dropping, women get unstable blood sugar and they want sweets, and a lot of them. And if they're denying themselves sweets, they'll go second best with carbs, like bread or something like that, right? So it's pretty clear when you look at a lot of these labs that women, when they have a dip in progesterone, will get an increase in their appetite. And there's a bunch of different hormonal connections. One is that progesterone is a precursor to cortisol, and cortisol is a glucocorticosteroid, right? So it's a blood sugar stabilizing hormone, in addition to doing a bunch of other stuff. So when your progesterone is at a certain low point, it's going to impact your blood sugar, right? And women notice this also, just throughout the cycle. Like usually it's the week before they're going to start to menstruate. Progesterone levels are abnormally low and they'll start to overeat. There's also sort of brain control mechanisms regarding appetite. There's two chemicals in the brain. One's called serotonin, the other's called dopamine. And if those chemicals are low, we'll tend to overeat carbs, overeat sweets as well. So there's brain reasons, there's hormonal reasons. If your cortisol levels are off also, and they're fluctuating and they're either going up or down abnormally, you're going to have really unstable blood sugar. And again, you're going to want sweets or carbs to sort of stabilize your blood sugar. So a lot of times we end up eating, or women end up eating in a way that's an attempt to normalize their hormones, to get their blood sugar back up, to help take the pressure off of cortisol or progesterone levels that are low. And the eating behavior is really your body's trying to balance out a deficiency of a hormone. But it doesn't work. It'll feel better for that day, but it just comes right back the next day or the next month with the same sort of vengeance. It's not really solving the problem.
Mm-mm. And then it makes you just feel worse because you're PMSing and now you're eating and you feel guilty and it's that cycle of what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
And then emotional crap goes on. It's a big cycle of mess.
And that's almost always times of low progesterone and abnormal cortisol, the two together, both the adrenal and female hormones crashing at the same time.
So that's what's happening. How can we not let that happen? Because I know when I'm working with any client of mine, that's Kara cheated on my food plan today. Must be PMS. And then we excuse it away with that, little description. So what can we do to avoid that?
Well, if you do the lab testing, you can do the natural progesterone, and that fixes it usually quickly. If you're not getting that into it, then you can do it with food. So you need 2 weeks on a no grain, no sugar diet, 2 weeks to really stabilize the blood sugar. No grains, no sugars, no alcohol for 2 straight weeks. And then gradually reintroduce small amounts of starchy carbs. But 2 weeks on a grain-free, sugar-free, alcohol-free diet is enough to stabilize your blood sugar and take away the cravings that are related to the adrenal glands and the fluctuations in blood sugar. But you got to be really strict for 2 weeks. That's a hard thing to do. That's the magic mark. Once you've been doing that kind of a diet for 2 weeks, your blood sugar will be nicely regulated. You're eating a lot of vegetables. You're eating plenty of protein, those kinds of things. But no starchy carbs, no sugar, no alcohol. And then start to reintroduce starchy carbs if you need to and see how much you can tolerate before the cravings come back.
So even no fruit, right? No natural sugar.
Maybe if you could allow a little bit of fruit, like maybe a piece or two of fruit a day. It's better not to do fruit in the beginning, but it's more important to cut the grains and sugar and alcohol out. Those are the most important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you should cut that out of your diet anyway, is my opinion.
Yeah, it's just a good reason to get people to do it. So.
Right. They become really aware of how much sugar they're really eating when they have
and alcohol is another huge one because women modulate drops in estrogen with alcohol. Mm. And it's always 100% of the time with wine. I don't know why. I've seen thousands of cases of women who modulate their estrogen with alcohol, and it's always a glass of wine.
Well, we like
it's fascinating.
Because it goes with the bubble bath and the candles.
It's never beer. It's never vodka. It's always wine. So here's the typical scenario. You're in your 20s. You have a glass of wine whenever you go out. You're in your 30s. You have an occasional glass on a pretty regular basis, but not all the time. All of a sudden you hit 40, 42, 44. and you're like, I want a glass of wine every day after work now. And then you get into your late 40s and you're like, I have to have a glass of wine every day after work now. And what you're tracking is the increase in alcohol consumption based on the dropping of estrogen. It's fascinating, really, because you get all that sugar at night and the alcohol, and it gives you a little sort of pseudo-estrogen boost. And these women are not alcoholics, right? They're just drinking the alcohol to modulate their hormones. And as soon as we get the hormones balanced out, the alcohol cravings just completely stop and they stop drinking. But most women don't know they have a problem. They just think, oh, I really like wine. I really feel I deserve a glass of wine. I need a glass of wine to relax, or it's Wednesday night, I'm going to have a glass of wine. Or it's Thursday, I should have, there's always some like reason. And
yes, let us hang on to those reasons. No, I understand. I went for a while of that stage. I'm not in it anymore, thank goodness. But it was a lot of combination of stress too, of course, in my life at the time. Where that's my reward at the end of the day as a busy mom. You're just, wine is calling my name, and it's actually got a word. So there's actually a negative effect, obviously, to consistently doing that to your body. Besides, of course, overconsumption of alcohol, but
besides the liver damage, you've got all the sugar that makes you fat. Right? Because you might as well just drink a glass of sugar water. And then when you drink a glass of sugar water or wine at night, it's going to spike your blood sugar up. And then in the middle of the night, your blood sugar is going to drop. So you're not going to sleep very well. It also kind of has like a depressive effect on your, central nervous system, and makes people a little depressed. It messes up your dopamine levels. So your brain doesn't, work as sharply. It's, not the best thing for people.
Wonderful.
It's a poison. Alcohol is basically a poison.
Yes, it is.
You have it in small amounts.
Yeah. Moderation is everything.
Unless you're French, and the French seem to be immune to this whole problem. So if you're French, but you had to be French and living in France. When the French moved to the U.S., and I've had a lot of French patients here in the U.S., they don't do as well with alcohol as they do back home.
So you got to live in France and drink like the French. Got it.
Yeah, then it works. Then that's totally acceptable.
Interesting facts. Well, I think we've covered a lot for our audience today. That's just great, good information. I'm gonna have to actually replay this and take some notes myself when I'm not in the interview mode. But any final? Well, actually, we have some gifts of yours I want to talk about, of course, and of course, there's a link in the body of this email and below the video that you can connect personally with Dr. Kalish. What do you have for us? I think there's a free ebook or something of that nature. I'm sure you can start us on this path.
Yeah, so I wrote a book a few years back. It's called Your Guide to Healthy Hormones. And so we're giving the ebook version of that away.
Awesome.
And pretty straightforward. It talks about what we're talking about today, adrenal hormones. We didn't talk much about gut function, but most all women that have hormone issues are going to have digestive problems as well. It gets into that. So it's it's an easy read. It's like around 100 pages. You can sit down in a weekend and flip through it and get the general idea about what we're talking about here in terms of balancing out hormones.
Yes, I hope it's brought a lot of awareness to those listening today, because it's a huge factor of your health, and if you don't get that stabilized, it's going to cause more problems later. So
and the thing is that you can easily fix this stuff with a 6-month natural program. If you can't fix it on your own, you don't have to suffer. You don't have to take the medications that are dangerous for these kinds of problems. So
that's the good news.
Yeah, totally fixable. Easy to fix, really.
That's the good news. Wonderful. Any final thoughts that you want to give to our audience today that you might want to still discuss with me?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that when you're under hormone-related, when your behavior and your thinking processes are being controlled by hormone-related problems, you don't have a lot of bandwidth for emotional and spiritual growth. So that what I see with the women I work with is once we normalize their hormones, it's not just that their hot flashes and night sweats go away, or they have a baby, or their PMS goes away. I mean, that's obvious. That's going to happen. That always happens. But what really the goal of the programs is to get you to the point where you're physically healthy enough that you can start to have the emotional and spiritual growth experiences that make being alive worthwhile. So we just use physical health to build a person up so you have a platform so you can go out and do the emotional and spiritual, growing that you want to do to make your life meaningful. That's where I think this leads to ultimately.
It's so true. Yes, I love that analogy. This is your vehicle to get you to a better life, and it's a lot more fun when it's finely tuned.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a lot more enjoyable. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kalish. You've been an extreme value to my series. I couldn't thank you enough. Again, hope to work with you more in the future. And I just want to thank you, and our audience thanks you as well.
You're very welcome. Appreciate it.